Some ancient ports were complete fakes, designed to trick the eye and protect entire empires. This is the hidden world of illusionary docks, where thriving harbors were masterful deceptions. You will discover the 15 ingenious strategies ancient engineers used to build these phantom ports, from decoy towns to psychological warfare. How did a civilization hide its most vital docks in plain sight? What drove them to create such elaborate maritime illusions? By the end, you will never look at an ancient coastline the same way again. What do you think it takes to hide something as massive as a port from an entire invading fleet? The island of Crete, home to the Minoan civilization, holds the earliest known blueprints for this maritime trickery. Over 3,000 years ago, their prosperity was built on the sea, a vibrant network of trade that stretched across the Mediterranean. But with great wealth came great risk, and the Minoans faced a constant threat from rival seafarers eager to plunder their ships or discover the source of their prized goods, like the exquisite Camers ware pottery. They could not simply hide their ports, as trade required access, so they began to master the art of making them difficult to find. According to maritime historian Dr. Elena Vasiliou, these early deceptions were brilliantly simple, leveraging the natural landscape itself as a cloak. They would identify a real cove with a safe anchorage, and then carefully arrange rock formations or even cultivate vegetation to obscure the actual entrance from the open water. From the perspective of a passing ship, the coastline would appear as an unbroken line of cliffs or a simple, inaccessible beach. There was no grand construction, just a subtle manipulation of what was already there, creating a hidden gateway that only their own experienced pilots could navigate. Think of it as the maritime equivalent of a secret door built into a bookshelf, invisible to anyone who does not know the precise location of the latch. These rudimentary methods of camouflaging dock entrances were the foundational experiments in a new form of defense. They proved that a port did not need towering walls to be secure, it just needed to be unseen. This initial success planted a crucial idea that the greatest protection was not in deflecting an attack, but in preventing one from ever being launched in the first place. The immense effort and ingenuity poured into these early illusions reveals the staggering value of what was at stake. For the Minoans and for every empire that followed, a single compromised trade route could mean economic collapse. Their entire way of life depended on controlling the sea lanes, and these deceptive harbors were their first vital line of defense, setting a precedent that would echo for centuries. The first and most fundamental strategy was to let the land itself do the lying. Ancient engineers became masters of a subtle art, choosing harbor locations not for their obvious convenience, but for their natural capacity to deceive. They sought out coastlines already gifted with optical illusions, places where the interplay of rock, water, and vegetation created perfect blind spots. A deep, sheltered cove might be hidden behind a screen of jagged cliffs that, from the sea, presented an unbroken, impenetrable wall. Lush mangroves or dense forests could swallow the entrance to a riverine port, their tangled roots and overhanging canopies masking the movement of ships within. The goal was always integration, not imposition, to build within the landscape so seamlessly that an enemy scout would see nothing but wilderness. The Phoenician city of Tyre perfected this approach. Its legendary main harbor was shielded by a labyrinth of natural reefs and shifting sandbars. To any foreign captain, these underwater formations presented a terrifying maze of potential shipwrecks, a clear deterrent that seemed to indicate a treacherous, unapproachable coast. But for the local pilots of Tyre who knew the secret winding channels through this aquatic gauntlet, it was a guaranteed safe passage. The hazards that repelled invaders were, in fact, a protective veil, guiding their own vessels home while actively funneling threats away. This method was brilliantly economical. Why spend years and vast resources building massive fortifications when you could simply find a coastline that already looked forbidding and then make a few, almost invisible, adjustments? A strategically placed grove of trees to block a sightline, or a few boulders moved to enhance a natural rock formation, could complete the illusion. The deception gained an inherent authenticity because it was rooted in truth, the truth of the landscape. A man-made wall can be scaled or battered down, but how do you attack a cliff face that was always there, or a swamp that seems to have no end? This use of natural geography formed the indispensable first layer of defense, a camouflage that was both permanent and profoundly convincing. It set the stage for the next, more audacious level of the illusion, where empires stopped merely hiding and started actively building a fiction. But the next layer of deception was far more theatrical. Ancient empires moved beyond simply hiding their ports and began building elaborate fictions right on the shoreline. The second strategy was the construction of false fronts and decoy docks, entire stage sets designed to draw an enemy's fire. Picture a long stretch of otherwise useless coast transformed by the art of illusion. From a distance, it looked utterly convincing, a bustling harbor with wooden quays, cranes for unloading cargo, and even rows of what appeared to be warehouses. Closer inspection would reveal dummy ships made from old hulls and scrap timber, moored to these fake piers. The goal was to create a target so tempting that raiders could not resist. Historical records from the Roman Empire describe exactly this kind of ruse deployed near Ostia, the crucial port that fed the city of Rome. To protect the vital grain shipments that kept the population from rioting, Roman engineers built decoy port facilities at a separate location. They used materials that would age naturally in the salt air, making the wooden structures look authentically worn. At times, they even employed people to act as dockworkers, creating the smoke from cook fires and the faint sounds of activity that would complete the mirage from a spyglass view. The psychological impact of this trick was profound. An invading fleet would spot what they believed was a rich prize, launch a full-scale assault, and waste their energy storming a beach of empty buildings. Meanwhile, the real port, situated a safe distance away, would continue its work uninterrupted, its cargo and ships completely secure. This strategy reveals a deep understanding of an attacker's mind. It was not enough to be hidden, you had to offer a more attractive alternative. What truly sold the illusion, what made these decoys so fatally convincing, was the obsessive attention to detail. A single misplaced crane or a warehouse that never showed any signs of life would betray the trick. The deception had to be holistic, a perfect performance played out on a grand coastal stage. This clever misdirection protected more than just ships and goods. It safeguarded the very stability of an empire. Yet, for all their complexity, these false fronts were still static defenses, waiting for an enemy to take the bait. The most brilliant deceptions were those that actively manipulated the attacker's perception, guiding their decisions before they even caught sight of the shore. This uncertainty was the true weapon. Ancient engineers understood that the most effective defense was not just to block an enemy, but to paralyze them with doubt. They weaponized the coastline itself, turning it into a psychological gauntlet designed to break an invader's will before a single arrow was ever fired. The great military strategist Sun Tzu famously wrote that all war is based on deception, and these maritime illusions were a direct application of that principle. The goal was to make every potential landing site a question mark, every promising cove a possible death trap. Imagine the perspective of a fleet commander approaching a hostile shore. He sees not one, but three seemingly identical harbors, each appearing equally viable and wealthy. Which one holds the real prize? Which two are elaborate stage sets concealing ambushes or leading to treacherous shoals? This forced hesitation was a priceless advantage for the defenders. It could delay an invasion for days as scouts were sent to investigate, buying crucial time to prepare the real defenses or move valuable cargo. It could splinter an attacking force as it divided to probe multiple false targets, making each contingent vulnerable. The Carthaginians were masters of this grim theater. Their harbors were rumored to feature perfectly constructed false channels that mimicked safe passage. An enemy ship, believing it had found the way into the city's heart, would instead be lured into a dead-end lagoon where the water was too shallow to maneuver. There, trapped and helpless, it would be bombarded with missiles from hidden positions on shore. This mental manipulation amplified the physical defenses exponentially. A wall is a simple obstacle to be overcome, but a puzzle must be solved under the extreme pressure of time, weather, and the ever-present fear of the unknown. It transformed the confident advance of an armada into a nervous, cautious crawl. The coastline was no longer a map to be read, but a riddle to be deciphered, a riddle that could cost an admiral his entire fleet if he guessed wrong. This psychological layer made the simple act of approach a potentially catastrophic gamble. And for the empires that perfected this art, the ultimate deception was yet to come, one that did not just mislead enemies but rendered their entire understanding of the world completely obsolete. A single misplaced beacon could doom an entire fleet. The third strategy in the ancient art of port deception was the most insidious of all: the weaponization of guidance itself. Empires realized they could not just hide their harbors or build fake ones. They could actively hijack an enemy's trust in the very tools that promised safe passage. They created misleading navigation aids and signal fires, turning lighthouses into traps and channel markers into liars. Imagine the lonely glow of a fire on a distant headland. For any sailor, that light was a welcome sight, a symbol of civilization and a guide to a safe anchorage. But in the hands of a clever defender, that same warm glow became a deadly lure, designed to guide hostile ships onto a concealed reef or into a barren cove far from the real port. This was a profound betrayal of maritime trust, a psychological attack that exploited an invader's most basic instincts. Ancient Greece was a hotbed for this form of treachery. Historical records from the long and brutal Peloponnesian War describe how the city-state of Corinth expertly used false beacons to confound the powerful Athenian navy. They maintained a complete duplicate signaling system. For their own merchants and allied vessels, a specific pattern of fires from a particular peak would indicate the true, safe channel. But for an approaching Athenian trireme, a different fire would be lit on a nearby but strategically placed cliff. This decoy beacon would appear to offer a clear path, but instead led the warships into a narrow strait where they were vulnerable to ambush or directly onto unforgiving shoals. The coordination required was immense, a silent ballet of deception performed across the hillsides, ensuring that only those in the know could navigate the coastline safely. The effectiveness of this strategy hinged entirely on the invaders' reliance on standard practices. Every captain knew to look for the guiding lights, making them the perfect vehicle for a lie. Yet this tactic came with immense risks for the empires that used it. They had to perform a delicate balancing act, deploying deception without strangling their own economic lifelines. If the false signals became too notorious, legitimate traders might grow fearful and avoid the area entirely, crippling the port's primary function. The solution was a system of coded signals and immense secrecy. Only the most trusted harbor pilots and a select few military commanders would know the true meanings. For everyone else, the coastline presented a uniform and uniformly deceptive face. This practice transformed the entire concept of a landmark. A lighthouse was no longer just a lighthouse, it was a question. A channel marker was not a guide, but a potential actor in a grand play of misdirection. The sea, already a realm of danger and mystery, was made even more treacherous by the hand of man, proving that the most powerful illusions are those that corrupt what we think we know for certain. The Phoenicians elevated maritime deception into a high art, weaving it directly into the fabric of their commercial empire. As the undisputed masters of the ancient sea lanes, their wealth flowed from trade, and their survival depended on protecting that flow from pirates and rival powers. Their ports were not just points of exchange, they were fortresses of illusion. Take the great cities of Sidon and Byblos. To an approaching vessel, their harbors presented a formidable face, often featuring a single, narrow main entrance that seemed to be the only way in. But this was merely the public doorway. Archaeological surveys have revealed the existence of hidden secondary entrances, cleverly concealed gaps in the breakwaters or channels masked by natural rock formations. These secret passages were known only to the guilds of local pilots, who could guide friendly merchant galleys through them with ease, bypassing any congestion or watchful eyes at the main gate. The deception went even deeper below the waterline. These master harbor engineers installed submerged obstacles, carefully placed rows of stones or sunken piles that created a hidden maze. For a captain without an experienced pilot on board, these unseen barriers meant a splintered hull and a sunken cargo. For a Phoenician trader, they were a guaranteed safe channel that led directly to the protected inner docks. This system was a brilliant form of access control, long before the invention of the keycard. It ensured that only authorized, friendly vessels could reach the heart of the port, where priceless goods like Tyrian purple dye and Lebanese cedar were unloaded. Any potential threat, whether a warship or a spy vessel, would be funneled towards the more obvious and more heavily defended main entrance or worse, lured into a decoy area that was designed for ambush. This intricate dance of commerce and defense was the Phoenician genius. As noted by maritime archaeologist Dr. Samuel Marks, their entire approach was economically motivated. A single successful raid on their primary harbor could have shattered their trade monopoly and crippled their city-states. Therefore, every deceptive feature, from the hidden entrance to the submerged obstacle, was an investment in economic security. The port was not just a shield, it was a filter, meticulously sorting friend from foe before they even tied a rope to a cleat. This seamless blend of shrewd business and cunning military strategy created a maritime defense system that was both subtle and incredibly robust. The legacy of these techniques did not fade with their empire. The Romans, who both admired and feared Phoenician naval prowess, adopted and adapted these very principles, incorporating hidden channels and defensive illusions into their own port designs across the Mediterranean. The Phoenician blueprint for deception became a foundational text in the long, hidden history of controlling the sea not by force alone, but by brilliant, calculated illusion. Beneath the calm surface of the water lay a silent, razor-sharp gauntlet. The fourth strategy in the ancient art of port deception moved the battlefield from the shoreline to the seabed, creating invisible defenses that could gut an enemy fleet before a single soldier ever came ashore. These were not mere hidden entrances, but actively hostile environments engineered to maim and destroy. Imagine a harbor approach that looked perfectly safe from a ship's deck, with deep, inviting blue water. But just below the waves, engineers had meticulously placed fields of jagged rocks, sharpened wooden stakes, and even massive logs chained together just deep enough to remain unseen. These obstacles were not randomly scattered. They were strategically arranged to create a lethal maze. A ship that strayed from the one true safe channel would have its hull torn open, its oars shattered, and its invasion force transformed into desperate swimmers. The Romans perfected this brutal form of coastal defense. At the great port of Caesarea Maritima, a marvel of engineering built by King Herod, historical accounts and archaeological evidence point to a sophisticated system of submerged barriers. The primary goal was not to create an impenetrable wall, but to funnel hostile ships. The obstacles were placed in such a way that they left a single, winding path clear, a path that led directly into a pre-arranged kill zone. An enemy vessel forced to follow this narrow, invisible corridor would find itself perfectly positioned for shore-based ballistae and catapults. Its speed and maneuverability would be nullified, making it a sitting duck for defenders raining down fire and stone. This entire system demanded an intimate, almost poetic understanding of the sea itself. The engineers had to account for shifting sands, powerful currents, and the relentless pull of the tides. A barrier placed too high would be exposed at low tide, revealing the entire deception. A log placed without considering the seasonal currents could be dislodged and washed away, or worse, could drift into the safe channel and block their own ships. Maintaining these submerged defenses was a constant, silent battle against the ocean. Teams of divers would have been needed for regular inspections and repairs, working in the cold, dark water to keep the Empire's secrets intact. The challenge was to create something durable enough to withstand the sea's punishment, yet subtle enough to avoid detection by any prying eyes. This combination of natural seabed features with artificial hazards created a seamless web of danger. A natural reef would be extended with placed stones, or a sandy channel would be lined with stakes. This made the deception incredibly difficult to spot, as the line between what nature provided and what man had engineered was deliberately blurred. It was a strategy that preyed on an attacker's most fundamental assumption that deep water meant safe passage. What these ancient mariners discovered, at the cost of their ships and their lives, was that the greatest threat was often the one they could not see coming. These decoy ports were masterclasses in theatrical engineering. To fool an experienced sailor's eye, the illusion had to be perfect, not just in appearance but in sound and even in how it weathered a storm. Ancient builders became set designers on a colossal scale, employing clever tricks with everyday materials. They constructed false quays and warehouses from lightweight timber frames, then stretched painted canvas over them to mimic stonework and tiled roofs from a distance. These structures were not built to last for centuries, but to convincingly survive a season of salt spray and sun, aging in a way that looked natural to a spyglass view. The real genius, however, lay in the moving parts. Some of the most elaborate decoys, particularly those from the Hellenistic period, incorporated simple machinery to create the illusion of life. Hidden aqueducts or cleverly channeled tidal flows would power water wheels that turned silently, their motion connected by ropes and pulleys to make dummy cranes appear to lift and lower invisible cargo. Even the soundscape was fabricated. Builders installed networks of pipes that would whistle and groan with the wind, producing the familiar cacophony of a working dock, the clatter of imagined cargo, and the low moan of ships straining at their moorings. This attention to auditory detail was what sold the Mirage, transforming a silent, empty facade into a seemingly thriving hub of commerce. The entire construction was a delicate balance. It had to be authentic enough to deceive, yet flimsy enough to be assembled quickly or dismantled if the ruse was discovered. This demanded a profound understanding of physics and material science. The engineers were not just builders, they were artists and psychologists, manipulating perception through a blend of carpentry, hydraulics, and sheer ingenuity. Their work stands as a testament to the technological creativity of the ancient world, proving that the most advanced engineering was not always used for grand monuments, but sometimes for the most elaborate and convincing lies. A harbor could transform with the setting sun. The fifth strategy in this ancient playbook was temporal deception, a manipulation of time itself to create a phantom port that lived and breathed only under the cover of darkness. Imagine the confusion of a spy observing a coastline for days. By daylight, a particular bay appears utterly deserted, a quiet cove with no signs of life or commerce. But as night falls, that same empty shore suddenly springs to life. Dozens of lanterns bob and weave along a non-existent waterfront. The distant sounds of shouts and the clanking of chains drift across the water, suggesting ships being unloaded. From a distance, it is the unmistakable portrait of a thriving, busy port, a target ripe for plunder. Yet it is all a meticulously staged performance, a grand illusion designed to waste an enemy's most precious resource, time. Some Egyptian ports along the Red Sea became masters of this chronological trickery. They operated decoy harbors on a strict shift system. Teams of defenders working in precise rotations would activate the deception during specific night watches. They would light fires in patterns that mimicked the movement of torch-bearing stevedores, and use simple devices to create the echoes of industry. The entire operation ran like a silent, well-rehearsed play, performed for an audience that was watching from miles away. The strategic impact was profound. An invading force relying on scouts' reports of this nightly activity would plan a night assault on what they believed was a bustling and therefore distracted harbor. They would find nothing but darkness and silence, their attack wasted on an empty beach. Alternatively, they might dismiss the daytime reports of an abandoned coast as faulty intelligence, convinced the real port must be elsewhere, sending them on a fruitless search. This method demanded incredible discipline and coordination. Maintaining the illusion without revealing a predictable pattern was the ultimate challenge. The teams operating the decoy had to vary the intensity of the lights and sounds, sometimes creating the impression of a slow night, other times simulating a frantic rush of activity. Any detectable routine could be exploited by a patient observer. The logistical effort to sustain this was immense, requiring a dedicated garrison, reliable communication between lookout posts, and a steady supply of fuel for the fires. It was a round-the-clock psychological operation, proving that the most convincing deceptions were not just built in space, but carefully choreographed across time. This manipulation of perception created a defensive shield that was as fluid as the ocean tides, protecting the real ports by offering a ghostly, irresistible mirage that vanished with the dawn. A port defended by ghosts was safer than one defended by walls alone. The sixth strategy in the ancient art of maritime illusion moved beyond physical engineering and into the realm of the mind, weaving cultural myths and local folklore directly into the defensive plan. Ancient rulers understood that the most powerful deterrents were often not spears or stones, but stories. They intentionally seeded their coastlines with legends of sea monsters, vengeful spirits, and cursed waters, creating an intangible shield that played upon the deepest superstitions of potential invaders. For a sailor whose world was governed by unpredictable storms and unseen dangers, the fear of a supernatural threat could be far more paralyzing than the fear of a human enemy. The Vikings were masters of this psychological warfare. To protect their hidden fjord settlements and trading posts, they propagated terrifying tales of the kraken and the halfgufa, colossal sea beasts that were said to lie in wait in specific, mist-shrouded inlets. These stories were not just campfire tales, they were strategic disinformation. A coastline rumored to be the hunting ground of a monster that could crush a longship in its tentacles was a coastline that rival explorers would give a wide berth. The physical deception of a hidden cove was thus reinforced by a cultural one, making the entire area seem both naturally treacherous and supernaturally forbidden. In Southeast Asia, this practice was refined to an art form. Rulers in the Malay archipelago would officially sanction legends of guardian spirits, known as penengu, that were believed to inhabit particular harbors. These spirits were not always malevolent, but they were fiercely territorial. The story would spread that the spirit protected the local people and their trade, and would bring terrible misfortune, storms, or sickness to any foreign vessel that entered without permission. This created a perfect self-policing psychological barrier. Local traders knew the proper rituals and offerings to appease the spirit, granting them safe passage. Outsiders, unaware of the protocols and hearing only the warnings, would see an ordinary stretch of coast as a place of immense supernatural risk. The genius of this approach was its effortless propagation. These stories did not require soldiers to enforce them. They traveled on the very trade winds the ports depended on, passed from sailor to sailor in every port tavern across the ocean. A king did not need to build a fleet to patrol every mile of coast. He could simply let the legend do the work for him. This cultural layer made the deception incredibly resilient. How do you disprove a ghost? How do you chart the lair of a monster that does not exist? By aligning their physical deceptions with powerful cultural narratives, these ancient societies created a defense system that was as much about belief as it was about brick and mortar. The coastline became a place of legend, and the greatest secret it kept was not the location of a port, but the simple, brilliant fact that the most convincing prison is one the mind builds for itself. A bustling marketplace could instantly transform into a naval fortress. The sixth strategy in the ancient art of port deception was the creation of dual-purpose harbors, seamless architectural chimeras that served the public face of commerce while hiding a clenched military fist just out of sight. These were not merely ports with a garrison nearby. They were integrated systems of illusion where the line between trade and war was deliberately blurred by design. Imagine walking the quays of such a place as a foreign merchant. You see cranes unloading spices and textiles, you hear the haggling of traders, and you witness goods being stored in large, open warehouses. The entire operation radiates peace and prosperity. What you do not see are the hidden compartments and moving parts. Behind a seemingly solid wall of one of those warehouses, an entire squadron of warships could be resting at secret docks, fully manned and ready for action. Or perhaps the very stone quay you are standing on is a massive, counterweighted platform designed to pivot or sink, revealing a hidden channel for a swift naval sortie. Archaeological evidence from ancient Carthage points to exactly this kind of sophisticated trickery. Excavations suggest that some of their key structures had collapsible sections. During peacetime, these areas functioned as normal wharves, bustling with civilian cargo. But in a moment of crisis, the mechanism could be activated, and the facade would vanish, allowing the Carthaginian navy to launch a surprise counter-attack directly from the heart of the commercial port, catching any blockading fleet completely off guard. This architectural sleight of hand required immense ingenuity. The moving parts had to be both powerful enough to handle massive weights and subtle enough to avoid detection during daily operations. The groaning of stone and timber had to be masked by the normal sounds of a busy dock. The entire illusion relied on perfect integration, ensuring that the port's peaceful disguise was never broken, even under the close scrutiny of foreign spies posing as traders. The strategic advantage was immense. It maximized the use of space and resources, concentrating both economic and military power in one defensible location. It provided the empire with ultimate operational flexibility, allowing it to project an image of open trade while retaining a devastating, concealed defensive capability. A ruler could invite the world to his market, all the while knowing he held an ace up his sleeve, a hidden navy ready to defend that very market from any who might betray his hospitality. This seamless blend of commerce and combat readiness represented the peak of pragmatic deception, where the greatest strength was not just in being hidden, but in being completely unexpected. The staggering cost of a single pirate raid could bankrupt an entire city-state. This stark economic reality was the true engine driving the creation of illusionary ports, transforming maritime deception from a clever military tactic into a fundamental pillar of financial strategy. For ancient empires, the sea was a highway of wealth, carrying everything from everyday grain to priceless luxuries like spices, silks, and incense. A hostile fleet capturing just one fully laden merchant convoy could represent a catastrophic loss, not merely of goods, but of the taxes, tariffs, and economic activity that those goods generated. The repeated plundering of Greek city-states by seaborne raiders serves as a brutal lesson. A thriving port like Corinth or Athens could see its economic momentum shattered overnight, its treasury drained, and its citizens plunged into hardship. The incentive to protect this flow of wealth was absolute. Building deceptive harbors was, in essence, a massive investment in risk management. A ruler faced a simple calculation. He could fund an enormous, perpetually active navy to patrol thousands of miles of coastline, a ruinously expensive endeavor requiring vast numbers of ships, sailors, and supplies. Or he could invest a one-time sum in clever engineers and local labor to reshape the landscape itself, creating a permanent, self-operating defensive system that worked 24 hours a day. The illusionary port was the ultimate force multiplier. A single hidden entrance or a well-placed decoy town could provide the same protective effect as an entire squadron of warships, but without the ongoing payroll and maintenance. This cost-effectiveness made deception the defense of choice for shrewd fiscal managers. Consider the distant Indus Valley civilization. While archaeological evidence is still emerging, some scholars theorize they employed deceptive tactics along their riverine trade routes to Mesopotamia. The Indus people traded coveted goods like carnelian beads and exotic woods. Protecting these shipments on the slow-moving rivers would have been a constant concern. A hidden dock or a misleading riverbank settlement could have safeguarded their cargo from rival tribes, ensuring their lucrative contracts with Mesopotamian city-states remained secure and their wealth continued to accumulate. This was not a matter of paranoia, but of pure economic pragmatism. Every gold coin spent on a dummy warehouse or a submerged obstacle was an insurance policy on the empire's entire economic engine. It guaranteed that the lifeblood of commerce could continue to pulse through hidden veins, invisible to the predators who sought to drain it. The silent, empty decoy port was not just a lie, it was a bold declaration of financial sovereignty. A port that appeared utterly worthless was the safest port of all. The seventh strategy took the art of deception to its most subtle extreme, the mimicry of abandonment. Ancient engineers discovered that the most effective way to hide a thriving hub of activity was to disguise it as its exact opposite, a forgotten ruin. They created phantom decay, constructing fully functional docks and warehouses to look as though they had been crumbling for generations. This was not a matter of simple neglect, it was a deliberate, painstaking process of artificial aging. Builders used pre-weathered timber, stones already scarred by lichen, and even incorporated sections of genuine ruins into new constructions. They would perform controlled partial demolitions, collapsing a single wall of a warehouse or toppling a corner of a quay to sell the illusion of structural failure. Vegetation was encouraged to climb and engulf the structures, with ivy and creeping plants carefully cultivated to mask clean lines and new mortar. The goal was to create a tableau of economic death, a place that any passing raider would dismiss with a single glance. Historical records from the Byzantine Empire reveal how crucial Black Sea ports employed this very tactic during periods of intense threat from Slavic raiders and nomadic steppe tribes. A port that normally buzzed with the trade of furs, grain, and wax would suddenly transform, its outward appearance shifting to that of a ghost town. The deception hinged on a ruthless understanding of pirate psychology. Raiders operating far from home needed quick, high-value scores. They could not afford to waste time and resources investigating every dilapidated cove on the coastline. A seemingly ruined port promised no loot and no glory, making it the least attractive target on the map. This strategy was brilliantly low maintenance. Once the initial illusion was set, nature itself became a co-conspirator. The sun continued to fade the wood, the salt air corroded the metal, and the plants grew thicker, all reinforcing the story of abandonment without any further effort from the defenders. The greatest challenge, however, was maintaining absolute operational secrecy. How do you run a busy port without leaving a single trace of recent activity? Every footprint in the mud, every fresh rope fiber snagged on a post, every wisp of cookfire smoke from a nearby settlement could betray the entire ruse. The solution was a discipline of shadows. All work had to be conducted under the cover of darkness or dense fog. Ships were unloaded with an almost silent efficiency. Their cargo moved on pathways designed to leave no permanent track. Any refuse was meticulously collected and disposed of far inland. The port had to be a phantom not only in appearance, but in its very existence, a place that logic said was dead, yet somehow still sustained the lifeblood of an empire. This was the ultimate maritime camouflage, proving that sometimes the best way to survive is to convincingly play dead. Every false beacon and hidden cove created a new battlefield of information. While the physical deceptions were masterpieces of engineering, their true success depended on a shadow war of spies and double agents, a silent conflict fought in port taverns and royal courts. Ancient empires understood that a secret, no matter how well hidden, was only safe if the enemy remained ignorant of its very existence. This led to the eighth strategy, a sophisticated system of naval intelligence and counter-deception. Port defenders constantly played a cat-and-mouse game, not just with invading fleets, but with the enemy scouts sent to unmask their illusions. They employed their own networks of informants to gather intelligence on what rival powers knew or thought they knew about their harbors. A single report from a merchant in a distant city about curious questions regarding a specific coastline could reveal that an enemy was suspicious, allowing the defenders to adjust their ruse or reinforce the deception before an attack ever materialized. The Persian Empire, in its long struggle with the Greek city-states, turned this information war into an art form. They famously used double agents to infiltrate Greek networks and spread carefully crafted misinformation. These agents would whisper tales of phantom Persian ports, describing incredibly wealthy but entirely fictional harbors located in treacherous, unmapped bays. Greek naval planners, receiving these conflicting reports from multiple supposed sources, would waste months and vast resources searching for targets that did not exist, their fleets drawn away from the real, well-protected centers of Persian trade. This psychological layer required a deep understanding of how an adversary thinks. Defenders had to anticipate not just what an enemy saw, but how they would interpret those sights and sounds. Would they recognize the slight weathering pattern on a decoy warehouse as artificial? Would they notice that the sounds of industry from a false dock never changed with the tides or the time of day? To answer these questions, empires relied on a vital feedback loop. They used trusted traders and allied sailors as their eyes and ears, tasking them with subtly gauging the rumors circulating in foreign ports. They also closely observed enemy ship movements. If hostile scouts repeatedly bypassed a real, hidden harbor to investigate a decoy, the defenders knew their illusion was holding. This constant cycle of deception, observation, and adaptation created a dynamic arms race of wits. The need to maintain ever more convincing lies drove innovations not only in port design, but in the very methods of gathering and protecting secrets. It proved that the most durable defense was a living, breathing system of misdirection, one that could learn, adapt, and lie better than the enemy could discover the truth. A sudden, unnatural fog could swallow an entire coastline in minutes. The eighth strategy in the ancient art of port deception was the breathtaking manipulation of the atmosphere itself, creating artificial weather to cloak a harbor in an impenetrable veil. While they could not command the skies, ancient engineers discovered they could manufacture localized conditions to baffle and mislead. Picture a fleet approaching a shore under clear skies, only to watch as a thick, gray bank of fog inexplicably rolls out from the land, obscuring every landmark and hiding the port's true layout behind a uniform wall of gray. This was not magic, but a calculated application of chemistry and climatology. Defenders would light precisely arranged fires along the shore, burning materials known to produce dense, persistent smoke. Wet hay, green wood, and certain types of resinous sap were the fuels of choice, creating a thick, low-hanging smog that clung to the water's surface. The Chinese, in particular, refined this into a tactical science during naval battles, using coordinated smoke screens to hide their ship movements and disorient their enemies. The timing of these artificial obscurations was everything. Planners with a deep knowledge of local wind patterns and tidal flows would wait for the perfect moment, often deploying the smoke to blend with an existing morning mist or an approaching weather front. This made the man-made fog appear entirely natural, a simple twist of bad luck for the invading navigator. The disorienting effect on a ship's crew was immediate and profound. Without visual references, their sense of direction evaporated. The sound of breakers would seem to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. A decoy harbor, its fake keys amplified and distorted by the haze, could appear as a massive, inviting haven, while the real port, silent and hidden, remained completely invisible just a few hundred yards away. This environmental manipulation represents a holistic leap in defensive thinking. It was no longer just about building a convincing static illusion, but about dynamically controlling the entire sensory experience of the approach. The harbor was not merely hidden, it was temporarily erased from the map, leaving an enemy fleet blind, confused, and utterly vulnerable to the whims of a coast they could no longer see. How do you attack a target that has simply vanished into the air? The principles of maritime illusion did not vanish with the ancient world. They simply evolved, finding new life in the stone fortresses of the medieval era. As empires rose and fell, the core idea that deception was cheaper and more effective than brute force continued to guide the hands of military architects. The Venetian Republic, a maritime empire built on a fragile lagoon, became the undisputed master of this inherited knowledge. They transformed their entire aquatic domain into a defensive labyrinth. The approach to Venice was a psychological gauntlet, a series of shifting sandbars and unmarked channels that only their own pilots could reliably navigate. They erected false landmarks on small, otherwise insignificant islands, luring hostile galleys away from the deep-water passages and into the grasping mudflats. This was the ancient strategy of misleading navigation aids, perfected on a grand, city-wide scale. But the Venetians did not stop there. They integrated these timeless tricks with the new realities of warfare. Their formidable arsenal, a stronghold guarding the entrance to the city's heart, was not just a castle by the sea. It was a stage for deception, featuring decoy gun ports and carefully angled walls designed to confuse an attacker's range finding and draw their fire onto reinforced, empty sections of stone. The goal remained the same as in ancient Tyre or Carthage, to waste the enemy's strength and break their will before they could even reach the true defenses. This continuity is starkly visible in the coastal forts built by Crusader orders like the Knights Hospitaller. Their massive strongholds, such as Crac des Chevaliers, often featured hidden sally ports. These were small, concealed gates that from a distance blended seamlessly into the formidable curtain walls. To a besieging army, the fortress appeared as a monolithic, impenetrable shell. But for the defenders, these hidden doors allowed knights to launch devastating, surprise attacks against siege lines, then retreat back into the safety of the castle, seemingly vanishing into solid stone. This was the architectural equivalent of the ancient hidden harbor entrance, a secret passage for offensive power. How did medieval engineers truly improve upon these ancient methods? They fused the psychological misdirection of the old world with the brutal new power of gunpowder and monumental military architecture. An ancient decoy port might feature dummy ships, but a Renaissance fort would boast dummy cannons and false embrasures, creating the illusion of overwhelming firepower. The core philosophy remained untouched. The most potent defense is one that manipulates the enemy's perception, convincing them that attack is either futile or far too costly. The enduring legacy of these illusionary ports is a testament to their timeless effectiveness, a hidden thread of cunning that connects the triremes of antiquity to the galleons of the early modern age. The creak of a ship's timbers and the distant shouts of dockworkers could be conjured from absolute silence. The ninth strategy in the ancient arsenal was acoustic deception, a phantom symphony designed to complete the illusion of a bustling port where only empty water lay. This was not merely about what an enemy could see, but what they could hear across the water, a sensory layer that made the mirage feel terrifyingly real. Defenders engineered these soundscapes with a musician's precision, using the environment itself as their instrument. Along the coasts of the Arabian Peninsula, they discovered that certain hollowed-out cliffs and sea caves acted as natural amplifiers. By producing specific sounds from within these geological formations, they could project a distorted cacophony of port life far out to sea. The sharp crack of a hammer on wood, the low groan of ropes under strain, even the rhythmic splash of oars would echo and blend, creating an auditory ghost town that seemed to pulse with invisible activity. The goal was psychological warfare, to suggest a strong, vigilant presence that would make a raider think twice before approaching. A quiet cove might be dismissed as worthless, but a cove that sounded like it was preparing for battle presented a formidable and unpredictable risk. The coordination of this auditory trickery with visual deceptions was its true genius. A decoy port with dummy cranes and fake warehouses was convincing to the eye, but if it stood in utter silence, the ruse would quickly unravel. Defenders timed their acoustic performances meticulously. As the sun set and the light made visual confirmation difficult, the sound of simulated industry would swell. The clatter from a few men hammering on planks inside a cave, amplified by the stone, could mimic an entire shipyard working through the night. This multisensory deception forced an enemy to trust neither his eyes nor his ears, paralyzing him with uncertainty. How do you plan an attack on a target that you can hear but cannot clearly see? This sophisticated understanding of sound propagation over water turned the very air into a weapon, proving that the most complete illusions are those that speak to you directly, whispering lies on the wind. The silent stones at the bottom of the sea are finally telling their story. For centuries, the existence of these illusionary ports was confined to fragments of text and legends. But modern archaeology is now pulling back the curtain on these ancient deceptions with hard, physical evidence. Advanced sonar surveys scanning the Mediterranean seabed have revealed stunning anomalies near the ruins of known harbors. What once appeared to be random fields of rubble are now being identified as meticulously arranged underwater barriers. These are not the chaotic results of shipwrecks or natural erosion. The stones are often found in long, deliberate lines or grids, positioned just deep enough to remain hidden from the surface yet shallow enough to fatally damage a ship's hull. This is the tangible proof of the engineering marvels we have only read about, confirming that the historical accounts of lethal underwater labyrinths were not mere exaggeration. The challenge for archaeologists is a fascinating puzzle of perception. How do you distinguish a natural rock formation from a 3,000-year-old intentional deception? A pile of stones might be just that, a pile of stones. But when those stones are all a similar size, are arranged in a geometric pattern that defies natural deposition, and are found strategically placed across the only navigable approach to a cove, the picture of a deliberate defensive work becomes clear. It is a painstaking process of context and elimination, separating the hand of man from the hand of nature. The true revolution in this detective work comes from technology like LiDAR and autonomous underwater vehicles. LiDAR, which uses laser pulses to map the ground from the air, can peer through shallow coastal waters to reveal the ghostly outlines of submerged structures, hidden channels, and even the foundations of decoy docks that have been invisible for millennia. Meanwhile, underwater robots glide silently through the depths, capturing high-resolution images and data without stirring up sediment or damaging the fragile sites. Each new scan and every robotic dive adds another piece to the puzzle, helping researchers build a three-dimensional model of how these ports truly functioned. We are discovering that the practice was far more widespread than previously believed, with evidence emerging from the coast of Turkey to the shores of North Africa. Every mapped barrier and every identified decoy settlement forces us to redraw our maps of the ancient world, revealing a hidden geography of fear and ingenuity. What did it take to maintain these submerged deceptions over generations? The archaeological record suggests a relentless, silent battle against the sea, where an empire's security depended on keeping its secrets perfectly intact on the ocean floor. An entire village could be conjured from nothing, a complete fiction built of wood and stone to protect a secret miles away. The 10th strategy in this ancient playbook was the strategic placement of decoy settlements, a monumental lie on a landscape scale. This was not merely a false dock or a misleading beacon. It was an entire phantom community, complete with dummy houses, staged cookfires, and the subtle signs of daily life. The goal was to create a target so compelling, so seemingly rich and vulnerable, that it would act as a magnet for any raiding party, pulling them away from the real hidden port and into a carefully prepared trap. The Romans became masters of this grand deception along the volatile coast of North Africa. To combat the constant threat of pirate raids on their lucrative trade routes, Roman auxiliaries constructed these false towns on prominent headlands, locations that were naturally visible to any ship passing along common navigation lanes. From the sea, the illusion was perfect, a promising coastal village ripe for plunder. The placement was everything, a deliberate sacrifice of one piece of the board to protect the king. These decoys required a staggering investment of labor and materials. Building a convincing town from scratch was no small feat, and maintaining the illusion of life was an ongoing operation. How did they populate these ghost towns? They used rotating garrisons of soldiers who would play the part of villagers during their watch. At times, they even enlisted local nomadic tribes as collaborators, people who understood the land and could move in and out of the decoy, creating the unpredictable comings and goings of a real settlement. Smoke would rise from certain hearths at regular intervals, laundry might be hung on lines, and the occasional figure would be visible moving between structures, all under the watchful eyes of hidden observers. The payoff for this immense effort came when a pirate fleet took the bait. Lured by the prospect of an easy score, they would land their forces on the beach and storm the village, only to find empty buildings and silent streets. In that moment of confusion, the trap would be sprung. The Roman soldiers, lying in wait in concealed positions in the surrounding hills, would unleash a devastating ambush, annihilating the raiders far from anything of actual value. This large-scale manipulation of the landscape reveals a chillingly pragmatic mindset. It was a form of strategic chess, where an empire was willing to expend significant resources not on a direct defense, but on creating an entire reality designed to mislead and destroy. The Decoy Settlement was the ultimate expression of a simple, brutal truth. Sometimes the best way to protect your most vital asset is to offer a more attractive one. An admiral's confidence could be shattered long before his ships ever saw combat. The psychological warfare waged by these illusionary ports inflicted a deeper, more corrosive damage than any sunken ship. For an invading commander, the experience was one of profound and mounting frustration. Imagine leading a powerful fleet, only to waste weeks pursuing a decoy town that vanished upon arrival, or to watch your finest warships run aground in a channel that your charts swore was deep. Each failure was not just a tactical loss, but a blow to morale and a drain on precious resources. This repeated humiliation bred a crippling condition: decision paralysis. Commanders, fearful of another costly mistake, would become pathologically cautious, delaying attacks indefinitely or bypassing potentially rich targets altogether, their strategic aggression completely neutralized by the gnawing fear of the unknown. The coastline itself became an adversary, a sphinx with 1,000 false faces, and every wrong guess carried a deadly price. This mental toll reshaped entire military campaigns, forcing empires to reconsider the very feasibility of naval invasion against a clever foe. For the merchants whose livelihoods depended on the sea, the constant deception created a different kind of strain. Legitimate traders lived in a state of low-grade anxiety, knowing that a single misjudgment, a single mistrusted signal, could lead them into the same traps set for their enemies. They could not simply sail for any promising harbor. They had to navigate a secret world of codes and local knowledge. This reliance transformed commerce from a simple matter of transport into a test of trust and connections. A merchant's most valuable asset was not his cargo, but his relationship with a trusted local pilot, one of the few individuals who knew the true meanings behind the flickering beacon lights and the hidden passages through the submerged stone fields. This necessity forged powerful, exclusive alliances between trading guilds and specific port cities, creating economic bonds that were as much about shared secrets as they were about shared profit. The uncertainty even seeped into the stories sailors told in foreign ports, evolving over generations into the very myths of phantom cities and haunted coasts we now recognize as legend. This long-term psychological impact forced a fundamental shift in how maritime powers operated. Rulers learned that controlling a coastline was not enough. You had to control the narrative surrounding it. This led to an unprecedented investment in intelligence networks and the cultivation of local allies, not for their armies but for their knowledge. The goal was to pierce the veil of deception others had cast, while ensuring your own illusions remained perfectly intact. In the end, the greatest legacy of these phantom ports may not be the battles they prevented, but the enduring lesson they taught that in the contest for the sea, the mind is the ultimate battlefield. A temple's sacred aura could shield an entire fleet from harm. The 11th strategy in this ancient art of deception was perhaps the most culturally ingenious, the seamless integration of ports with religious or ceremonial sites. This was not a matter of mere proximity, but a profound fusion of the spiritual and the strategic, creating a defense that was as much about belief as it was about ballisticity. Imagine a magnificent temple complex perched on a cliff, its white marble columns gleaming in the sun, a beacon of piety visible for miles out to sea. Pilgrims would travel from distant lands to seek guidance from its oracle or to leave offerings at its altars. Yet, just around a headland, hidden from view by the temple's own imposing bulk, lay a fully operational military harbor. The sacred site was not just a neighbor, it was a deliberate part of the camouflage. The constant, very public activity of the faithful provided the perfect cover for the discreet movement of soldiers, supplies, and naval commanders. A column of troops marching toward the temple would not raise an alarm. They could simply be devout worshippers or a ceremonial guard. The loading of special cargo onto ships in the hidden cove could be disguised as the transport of sacred objects or temple treasures. This daily masquerade made the port's defensive operations invisible in plain sight, hidden within the rhythms of religious life. The deterrent effect was equally powerful. In the ancient Greek world, attacking a site under divine protection was not just a military action, it was a sacrilege. An admiral considering an assault on a harbor associated with a famous oracle, like the one at Delphi's port of Curra, would have to weigh the risk of not only military failure but also divine retribution and the outrage of the entire Greek world. This cultural taboo against desecrating holy places created a moral force field, a psychological barrier that many invaders were unwilling to breach. The planning required for this symbiosis was immense. Temple priests and military commanders had to coordinate in a delicate dance, ensuring that the sacred ceremonies were never disrupted by the sound of naval drills, and that the port's security was never compromised by a sudden influx of pilgrims. It was a partnership of power where the authority of the gods was enlisted to protect the power of the state. This blending of the spiritual and the strategic made these ports seem almost inviolable, their protection assured not just by human ingenuity, but by the favor of the heavens themselves. The sheer scale of the Roman Empire made its supply lines a constant target. To secure the flow of grain, troops, and treasure across the Mediterranean and beyond, Roman engineers applied their legendary skills not just to building ports, but to hiding them in plain sight. Their methods were systematic and scalable, a direct application of military logic to the problem of maritime security. A harbor was not merely a dock, it was a node in a vast defensive network designed to confuse and deter any potential aggressor. The port of Classis at Ravenna stands as a prime example of this sophisticated deception. Serving as the premier naval base for the Roman fleet in the Adriatic, its survival was paramount. Rather than constructing massive, obvious fortifications that would scream military importance, the Romans engineered a landscape of ambiguity. They designed a complex web of canals and created artificial islands, fragmenting the view of the port's inner workings from the sea. To any spy or scout, Classis appeared as a scattered collection of modest settlements and minor docks. The true scale of its shipyards, its vast warehouses, and its capacity to shelter an entire fleet remained a closely guarded secret, hidden within this labyrinthine layout. This architectural misdirection was often paired with dynamic elements that could change the port's face in moments. Archaeological evidence points to ports featuring adjustable water levels controlled by sluice gates. By raising or lowering the water in specific basins, they could make deep harbors appear treacherously shallow or, conversely, hide accessible channels by making them look like muddy flats. Movable bridges served a similar purpose, capable of isolating sections of the port or creating new, deceptive pathways to confound anyone who managed to penetrate the outer defenses. What can we learn from the Roman approach? Their genius lay in adaptability. The same core principles of illusion could be scaled from a remote outpost in foggy Britannia, protecting a secret shipment of tin, to a major naval hub in North Africa, safeguarding the grain that fed the city of Rome itself. They understood that deception was not a single trick, but a flexible, layered system. A false breakwater might lure a raiding ship into a trap, while a hidden stockpile of goods ensured that even if the outer docks were compromised, the empire's vital resources remained secure. This integration of illusion into standard military engineering created a resilient defense in depth. It ensured that Roman dominance over the sea routes was maintained not only through the strength of their legions, but through the cleverness of their designs, proving that the most powerful empire could also be the most cunning. A harbor could shed its skin with the turning of the seasons, transforming from a vibrant hub into a frozen ghost before an enemy's very eyes. The 12th strategy perfected the art of the dynamic deception, where a port's appearance was not fixed but fluid, changing in response to the calendar, the weather, or the shifting winds of politics. This was not a static illusion, but a living, breathing performance that kept potential invaders perpetually off balance. In the northern realms of the Viking world, some protected fjord settlements employed a breathtaking form of seasonal camouflage. During the vulnerable winter months, when the long nights offered cover for raiders, defenders would construct artificial ice formations along the shoreline. They used a mixture of seawater and packed snow to build up false, jagged barriers that mimicked a frozen, impassable coast. From a distance, their operational harbor, kept clear by hidden currents and constant labor, would appear to be completely locked in by impassable ice, a place of no value to any passing longship seeking shelter or plunder. The logistical genius behind these transformations was immense. It required a deep, almost intuitive understanding of local environmental cycles. Planners had to predict the first frosts, the prevailing snowdrift patterns, and the precise timing of the spring thaw to ensure their artificial winter facade looked completely authentic and melted away in harmony with the natural world. This demanded flexible infrastructure and pre-positioned materials, stockpiles of wooden frames, nets, and white-colored fabrics stored in nearby caves or hidden storehouses, ready to be deployed by trained crews at a moment's notice. How did they manage to keep a port fully operational while making it look completely abandoned? The answer lay in a discipline of controlled visibility. All winter activity, from the unloading of vital supplies to the movement of ships, was confined to specific hours of twilight or conducted under the cover of frequent Arctic storms. The goal was to create a perfect seasonal lie, one that leveraged the environment itself as a co-conspirator. An admiral observing the coast in summer would see one reality, a map of potential targets. Returning in winter, he would find that map erased and redrawn, his intelligence rendered obsolete by the simple, brilliant fact that the greatest deceptions are those that know when to hide and when to simply play dead. This intricate dance of deception raises profound ethical questions that echo across the centuries. Was such cunning a dishonorable trick or a brilliant and necessary strategy for survival? Ancient cultures were deeply divided on this point. The Spartans, for instance, built their entire warrior identity on the ideal of direct, face-to-face combat in open battle. To them, strategies like illusionary ports might have seemed cowardly, a dishonorable departure from the straightforward test of strength and courage. In stark contrast, the Athenians and their philosophical counterparts often argued for a more pragmatic view. They saw strategic deception not as a moral failing, but as the highest form of intelligence, a legitimate tool to protect the state and its people from overwhelming force. The great philosopher Plato himself wrestled with this very dilemma in his writings, questioning whether a leader, like a doctor, might be justified in using noble lies for the greater good of the community. This was not a simple debate between right and wrong, but a complex negotiation between competing virtues, honor and survival, transparency and security. In practice, the justification for building these phantom ports was overwhelmingly pragmatic. For the rulers and engineers, the primary moral calculation was a stark one. The ends of protecting innocent civilians from slaughter, of safeguarding the food supply that prevented famine, and of preserving an entire civilization's economic stability, clearly justified the means of a clever lie told with wood, stone, and fire. This ethical framework reveals a world where the morality of an action was often measured by its consequences for the collective. The survival of the city-state, the empire, the entire way of life, was the ultimate good, and any tactic that secured it could be rationalized. How do our modern perspectives on warfare and ethics align with these ancient practices? The tension is remarkably continuous. Today, nations still grapple with the same core conflict, balancing the ideal of transparent engagement with the undeniable need for operational secrecy and strategic misdirection to protect national security. The ancient harbormaster hiding his port behind a false coastline and the modern government concealing its most vital assets are both operating on a similar principle, that the safety of the many can sometimes necessitate a deception against the few. This enduring dilemma shows that the line between cunning and honor is not just a line drawn in the sand, but one etched into the very nature of conflict itself. A living, breathing cloak of green could swallow a harbor whole. The 13th strategy in this ancient art of illusion was biological camouflage, a brilliant partnership with nature itself. Engineers did not just build with stone and timber, they cultivated entire ecosystems to act as their silent sentinels. They would identify fast-growing local species like dense mangroves or clinging seaweed, and deliberately plant them around harbor entrances and along breakwaters. Over a few seasons, these plants would mature, their roots and fronds intertwining with the man-made structures, blurring the line between what was built and what had simply grown. The sharp, geometric lines of a quay would soften and vanish beneath a curtain of foliage, making the entire port appear as an untouched, wild stretch of coast from just a short distance away. In the intricate river networks of Southeast Asia, this method was perfected. Defenders would weave together floating mats of water hyacinth and other buoyant plants, anchoring them strategically around the wooden pilings of their docks. To any passing vessel, these floating islands looked like natural accumulations of river debris, effectively hiding the telltale straight lines and cleared areas that would signal human activity. The camouflage was not merely visual. A dense enough barrier of mangroves with their tangled, submerged root systems presented a genuine physical threat. A ship attempting to force its way through what it believed was a thin screen of plants could find its hull snagged and its oars entangled, leaving it helplessly stuck, a perfect target for defenders. This approach was remarkably sustainable. Once established, the living camouflage maintained itself, growing thicker and more convincing with each passing year. It required no garrison to man it and no engineers to repair it after a storm. The local flora simply regrew, but this reliance on nature was also its greatest vulnerability. The strategy came with inherent limitations. A harsh winter could kill off the protective vegetation, suddenly revealing the port's secrets with the spring thaw. A change in sea temperature or salinity could cause a cultivated seaweed bed to die back unexpectedly. Perhaps the most unpredictable risk was the introduction of an invasive species. A new type of mollusk or a faster spreading plant could overtake the carefully managed camouflage, either stripping it away entirely or growing so thickly that it began to choke the port's own access channels. This delicate balance with the environment meant that a harbor protected by biology was always one ecological shift away from exposure, a timeless reminder that even the most ingenious human deception must ultimately bow to the forces of the natural world. The blueprint for maritime deception proved irresistibly exportable. As trade routes stitched the ancient world together, the clever ruse of the illusionary port traveled with every merchant ship and diplomatic envoy, taking root in soils far from the Mediterranean. In China, the great dynasties faced their own unique threats along the sprawling Yangtze River. To protect their vital interior cities from naval incursions, they engineered deceptive river ports. These were not hidden behind cliffs but woven into the landscape of the river itself. They would construct false waterfronts on secondary channels, complete with dummy warehouses that, from the river, appeared to be bustling with activity. The real port, however, was often concealed around a bend, its entrance masked by artificially enhanced reed beds or a screen of deliberately sunken, vegetation-covered barges. The goal was to lure an attacking fleet into a dead-end tributary where their larger vessels would be trapped and ambushed by smaller, more maneuverable patrol boats. Half a world away, emerging evidence suggests pre-Columbian cultures in the Americas employed a similar logic on their vast lake systems. In places like Lake Titicaca, communities may have used networks of artificial islands and hidden canals to create a labyrinthine coastline, concealing their true settlements and trading hubs from rival groups. A seemingly random collection of reeds might hide a channel leading to a thriving community, a secret known only to those born on the water. This global phenomenon reveals a profound truth. The drive to protect one's home and wealth from the sea was a universal challenge, and the strategic solution of deception arose again and again, a parallel innovation born of shared necessity. It was not a single idea spreading from one source, but a recurring answer to a persistent problem. Yet, while the core principle was universal, the cultural lens through which it was implemented varied dramatically. In the Mediterranean, deception was often a matter of military and economic pragmatism, a calculated engineering solution. In Southeast Asia, the same goal might be achieved by amplifying local spirit myths, making a cove spiritually forbidden. In the Americas, the deception was often more organic, a seamless blending into the existing aquatic environment that respected the natural world. This cultural fingerprint dictated the tools and the symbolism of the illusion. The exchange of these ideas was facilitated by the very conflicts and commerce they were designed to protect. A merchant who witnessed the submerged barriers of Carthage might describe them to a harbor master in India, inspiring a local version using bamboo stakes instead of stone. A captured engineer could be forced to reveal the secrets of movable bridges, his knowledge then adapted to a new landscape. The techniques were never copied outright. They were always remade with local materials and local genius, proving that the most effective lie is one that feels true to its surroundings. The sea itself could be taught to lie. The 14th strategy in this ancient arsenal involved illusory tidal and current manipulation, where engineers subtly rewrote the rules of the water to guide enemies toward ruin. They could not command the ocean's vast rhythms, but they discovered they could design local illusions using artificial channels and submerged dams to redirect the flow. A seemingly natural current, one that promised safe passage into a sheltered bay, might in fact be a carefully engineered conveyor belt leading a ship directly onto a sandbar or into a dead-end lagoon. In some Persian Gulf ports, angled breakwaters were the key. Instead of being built straight out from the shore to create a calm basin, these barriers were constructed at precise, oblique angles. From the sea, their true purpose was invisible, but their effect on the water was profound. They deflected the natural tidal flow, creating powerful, deceptive currents that swept past the real harbor entrance and toward a false one, or worse, into a maze of underwater hazard. For a captain unfamiliar with these hidden geometries, the result was utter confusion. His ship, seemingly following a reliable current, would be pulled off course. He might find himself stranded as the tide receded, or caught in a circular flow that left him circling aimlessly, unable to make headway toward his target. This entire system demanded an intimate and precise knowledge of hydraulics. The engineers had to calculate how their structures would behave not just at high tide or low tide, but through the entire tidal cycle. A miscalculation could be disastrous, either rendering the illusion ineffective or, worse, disrupting the safe currents their own pilots relied upon to enter the real port. Maintaining the deception was a constant battle against silt and storm. The very structures that manipulated the water also altered sand deposition, requiring regular dredging to keep the illusion intact and the true channels clear. This approach demonstrates a profound leap in thinking, where the sea was no longer just an obstacle to be conquered or a medium to be crossed, but an active partner in the deception, a fluid and dynamic component of the defense. What engineering principles did they apply to achieve these fluid effects? Without advanced mathematics, they relied on generations of patient observation and methodical trial and error. They watched how water swirled around a natural headland and then replicated that effect with a man-made wall. They noted where sandbars naturally formed and then enhanced them to create more effective traps. This was engineering born of a deep, accumulated wisdom, a slow, careful process of learning to speak the language of the sea and then teaching it to tell a perfect, protective lie. A cannonball could shatter the most perfect illusion in an instant. The age of gunpowder fundamentally rewrote the rules of coastal defense, rendering the ancient art of visual deception suddenly vulnerable. For centuries, a port's safety had depended on remaining unseen or appearing unworthy of attack. But when a fleet could stand offshore and unleash a storm of iron, the mere appearance of a harbor no longer mattered. Its exact location did. The very essence of deception, which had thrived on tricking the eye from a mile away, was rendered nearly obsolete by the brutal physics of long-range artillery. An invading admiral no longer needed to risk his ships in a labyrinth of hidden stakes or be lured into a decoy town. He could simply anchor beyond the range of most shore defenses and systematically pound the coastline into rubble, whether it was a real port or a masterful fake. This technological shift forced a dramatic evolution in defensive thinking. The focus moved from cunning to concrete, from misdirection to massive fortification. The iconic star-shaped forts that began dotting coastlines in the 16th and 17th centuries were the direct result of this new reality. Their low, thick, angled walls were specifically designed to deflect cannonballs and provide clear fields of fire for the defenders' own guns. A port's security was now measured in the thickness of its masonry and the number of cannons it could mount, not the subtlety of its camouflage. Deception did not vanish. but its role was profoundly diminished, becoming a secondary layer rather than the primary shield. It evolved from a grand strategic concept into a tactical trick. Hidden gun batteries became the new hidden harbors. Builders would camouflage artillery emplacements to look like innocent cliffsides or rustic barns, attempting to lure enemy ships into a point-blank kill zone before revealing their true firepower. The principle of misdirection lived on, but its scale had shrunk from the entire coastline to a single, deadly bluff. This transition marks a clear turning point in the history of conflict. It was the moment when sheer destructive power began to outweigh cleverness in the calculus of defense. The empires that thrived were those who could build the strongest walls and forge the most cannons, not necessarily those who could tell the most convincing lies. Yet, the ghost of the illusionary port never fully departed. How did the ancient principles of deception influence later naval tactics? They did not die, they simply went underground, evolving into the military cunning of camouflage, misinformation, and tactical feints that would define warfare for centuries to come. The desire to hide, to mislead, and to surprise the enemy is a constant in the story of conflict, forever adapting to the weapons of the day. The silence of an entire town could be its most powerful defense. This final, and perhaps most intimate, strategy moved the deception from the landscape directly into the hearts and minds of the people. It was a web of social control, where every fisherman, every merchant, and every child playing on the beach became a guardian of the port's secret. An outsider asking for directions to the main docks might be cheerfully misled down a path to a crumbling, ancient pier. A curious traveler inquiring about the strange lights on the headland would be told a folktale about restless spirits, a story passed down for generations specifically for that purpose. The entire community was enlisted in the performance, bound by a shared understanding that their prosperity and their safety depended on the lie. In the ancient ports of the Levant, this system often ran on the powerful engine of clan-based loyalty. Your identity was tied to your family, and your family's honor was tied to its role in protecting the city's most vital asset. Betraying the port's secrets was not just a crime against the state, it was a profound, unforgivable betrayal of your own bloodline. The penalties were severe and brutally public, designed to serve as a grim reminder to everyone. A loose tongue could result in exile from the community, the confiscation of property, or even execution. This created a culture of inherent suspicion toward outsiders, where the simple act of asking the wrong question could mark you as a spy. How did empires enforce this secrecy across diverse and sometimes reluctant populations? They wielded a careful balance of carrot and stick. Alongside the threat of punishment, there were tangible rewards for compliance. The families of trusted pilots received tax breaks or preferential trading rights. Those who played their part in the deception, perhaps by helping to maintain a decoy structure or by spreading a piece of strategic misinformation in a tavern, might be paid from a secret treasury. This system of incentives made the local population active stakeholders in the illusion. It was no longer a secret they were forced to keep, but one they had a vested interest in protecting. The controlled flow of information extended to the highest levels of commerce. Only the most trusted trading partners, those with long-standing relationships and proven loyalty, would receive the accurate harbor charts or be assigned a pilot who knew the true, safe channels. A new merchant from a rival city would be given outdated maps or led through a circuitous, but safe, route that deliberately obscured the port's actual layout and defenses. This social layer made the physical deceptions infinitely more resilient. A submerged barrier could be mapped by a determined diver, and a false facade could be recognized by a sharp-eyed scout. But how do you map a community's unspoken bonds? How do you scout a secret that an entire town has sworn to carry to their graves? The human element became the final and most impervious wall around the hidden harbor, proving that the most enduring fortress is not made of stone, but of a shared, unbreakable silence. The silent, unseen guardians of empires were not always soldiers, but cleverly placed logs and painted canvases. These illusionary ports stand as a powerful testament to a timeless truth, that the most effective protection often lies not in brute strength, but in brilliant deception. Across centuries and continents, from the hidden coves of the Phoenicians to the false fronts of Rome, a common thread emerges, a profound understanding of the human mind. These empires realized that to secure their wealth and their people, they had to win the battle of perception long before any physical conflict began. They masterfully balanced psychology, engineering, and economics, creating defenses that were as cost-effective as they were cunning. The silent, submerged barrier was a smarter investment than a fleet of warships, and a well-placed decoy town could achieve what a legion could not. This drive to protect what is valuable through ingenuity is a deeply human impulse, one that echoes from those ancient shorelines to our own modern world. The lessons carved into these forgotten coastlines are strikingly relevant today. How might these principles of misdirection and environmental integration inspire contemporary solutions for coastal management and defense? Could the subtle, sustainable approach of biological camouflage inform how we protect sensitive marine habitats or secure modern port facilities from new threats? The past offers a rich library of strategic thinking, reminding us that security is not always about building higher walls, but about crafting smarter illusions. Thank you for exploring these hidden chapters of history with us. If these maritime mysteries captured your imagination, subscribe for more journeys into the past and share your thoughts. Which of these ancient deceptions amazed you the